Hey everyone, and welcome to another Unity tutorial. I'm Ryan, and today we're going to be looking how to make a simple game where you are a ball that rolls around to collect cubes for points. And that's really all it is, and you can see if I go ahead and hit play, this is what our end goal is going to be. So you can see I'm just a little ball, and I can just use the arrow keys to go around to the cubes, and then you can see in the top left I'm getting points for collecting these cubes. And that's really it. There's no end goal for this. It's just play until you get bored, but you can feel free to add more things to this at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new scene just so we can start from scratch. And first, to create some ground, we're going to create a plane. And we can do this by going in the hierarchy section, right click, and then do 3D object, and then we're going to do plane. And then you can see there's this nice little white square for us to go on. I'm going to come up here to the transform and just set it to 0, 0, 0, and then I'm actually going to scale it to 313. You can scale the Y direction, but because this is actually a two-dimensional plane, there's really no height for this, so changing that's not going to really do anything. So we'll just leave it at 1. So this is our plane, and we actually want to give this some color because if everything's the same color, in this case white, it's going to be very hard to see the player, the items, and just so on and so forth. So we want to add some color to this, and we can do that by creating something called a material. Now what a material is it's just a way to texture an object. So if you have like a spaceship, or in this case our ground, we want to add some color to it. So we're just going to go ahead and make a material for that. So in our assets area, we can right click and then create and then material. And now you can see we have a new material. So I'm just going to rename this one to be ground. And we're actually going to come over here in the inspector to this little white box right here, and we can click on that and ignore that stuff. And then I want to give this a blue color because I like blue, so we can just set that to 0, 0, 255, so it's all blue and no other colors. And this is about as pure as blue as we can get. So I'm going to come over here to the ground material that we just created. I'm actually going to click and then drag it onto our plane. And now you can see right here we have a fully blue ground. And that's all we have to do with the ground. So let's go ahead and move on to our player. Now our player, like I said, was going to be a sphere. So we're going to come up here to hierarchy. We're going to right click, we're going to do 3D object, and then we're going to do sphere. And I'm going to rename this sphere to be player just so we know what we're working with. And one thing we're going to need actually for this player to actually work is we're going to need to add a rigid body component. Now this is just going to be a thing to work with some physics, but we're actually going to use the velocity of the rigid body to move around. Now you can see right now that our sphere is actually kind of inside of our plane. So I'm going to rename our transform, or redo our transform position to be 0, 0.5, and then 0. And this will put it right in the middle of the plane, but it'll raise it up just high enough so it's sitting right on top of our plane. And then we can keep the scale the same, but feel free to change that size if you want to. Next up, so we can actually have this player be controllable, we need to add a script. Now this isn't going to be a very long script, so we can come over here to add component and you can just say, I called mine ball rolling, so I'm going to go ahead and add that, and let's go ahead and get that started right now. So we're going to need some variables to begin with, so we need a rigid body variable, which I can just call RB, which is what we added, that component, and this is how we can access it within the script. And then I'm also going to have a public float, which is move speed. And then lastly, I'm going to have a private int score, which we all know what that does. And at the start, I'm just going to simply do RB equals get component, and then little angle brace, and then rigid body. And then close that angle brace, and then do an empty open close parenthesis. And now what this does is just has access to the rigid body inside the script, so now we can do whatever we want to do with it later. And then I'm just going to set the score to 0 just so it's all initialized correctly. Now in our update, what we're going to do is we're just going to do RB to get that rigid body that we just saved. And I'm actually going to do rb.velocity. And what this will do is this will just make it so the ball moves around by our input on the keyboard. And so velocity is a new vector3, and then we're going to do the x, y, and z coordinates. And the x value is going to be from input, which is just user input, and then we're going to do get axes, and then we have to do open parenthesis, and in quotes we're going to type in horizontal. Now what horizontal does is just left and right keyboard input, and this is Unity default, so it'll be left and right arrows, or it'll be A and D if you're WASD kind of player. Alright, so we have the X coordinate, and the Y coordinate is actually up and down, so we want to keep this at 0 so we're not flying off the board or anything. And then lastly, for the Z, it's actually going to be get axes again, but this time we're going to do vertical for up and down movement. And then finally, I'm actually going to multiply all of that by move speed just so it scales up and scales down whenever we need to. So if we save that and head back to our Unity game, you should be able to see that we have our ball and nothing's happening. The reason why is because over here in ball rolling script, we need to set our move speed. So I'm going to go ahead and just set that to 10, and that seems like a good speed. So now if I move around, you can see our ball is moving. One warning though, I am in play mode when I made that edit, so if I go ahead and hit out of that, you can see that move speed was set back to 0. So I'm going to actually go ahead and just set that back to 10 so we don't give ourselves any headaches in the future. Also, while we're at it, we might as well go and fix that camera, because this is what we're looking at right now, and we want the camera to be able to see the whole board. So I can go ahead in the hierarchy and click on main camera, and then I'm just going to move it back a little bit and then up a little bit, and then I'm going to come up here to this little double arrow thing, and then I can click on this red. It might be different for your case, but I can angle the camera like this, and we'll just angle it like that, and then I'll move it, I'll move it back, just backing up just a little bit. Doesn't have to be perfect, just so you can see most of the board. So that looks pretty good. And then now if we play again, you can see that we can see pretty much the entire board a bit nicer now. So I'm going to go ahead now and we're going to create the items that we're going to be picking up. So I just use a simple cube, so I can come back here to right click hierarchy and then do 3D object and then cube. If you're not a fan of the right clicking, you can actually come up here to where it says game object and then do 3D object and then cube, just like we've been doing before. So here we have our cube right now, and we actually want to add another material for this just so we can have it stand out a bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and right click in assets, and then, or you can come up here to assets on the top and then create, and then material will work just as well. And I'm going to call this one item material, and I'm going to actually use green for this one because we want the player to be able to know it's a good item, and green usually means good. So 0, 255, and 0 is just pure green. And again, now that I've made that material, I can just drag on to that cube that material. So now that we have that cube, we actually have to add a couple more things to that. Actually, all we have to add is a rigid body in this case, and we're actually going to uncheck use gravity. And this will just make sure it doesn't fall to the floor, because we're actually going to kind of disable the box collider, and we're going to do that by checking this is trigger checkbox right here in the box collider. And what that does is it's just going to be a way to check to see if something collides with it, in this case the player. So that's actually all we have to do for this, and I'm actually going to rename this to be item. Now we want to spawn these items every time an item is picked up. So if we pick up one item, it should spawn another item. And to do that, we have to create this thing called a prefab. So I can come over here to assets, right click, and then create, and then I want a prefab, and I'm going to call this item. And then what a prefab is, it just allows me to kind of copy and paste a object that is already in the game. So in this case, we already have our item, so I can just drag on the item from the hierarchy onto the item prefab in our assets. And now you can see we have this nice little green cube right here. And it has the checkbox checked, and then it already has our rigid body all set. So now I can actually just drag in cubes like I want to. We don't want to do that right now though, because we're actually going to change our script to create these cubes. So if we go back to our script, we're actually going to create a method which is called void and then spawn item. And all this is going to do is it's going to randomly pick a position. So vector3 spawn position is going to be equal to random dot inside unit circle, and then we're going to multiply that by 25. And this will just pick a random distance between 0 and 25. And as you can see, if I go out to right here, that's actually 15. So never mind. So we're going to change that actually to 15. And this will just pick any value in a circle 15 radius around the player, or around the center of the map. And because vector3 is weird when we're working this way, we actually have to switch the x and y, the z and y position, and we're actually going to set the y position to be 0.5 f, and that will put it safely on the ground. And finally, we call instantiate, which is just a method to do some prefabs, and actually we're going to create a new variable, which is going to be a public, and this is going to be a game object, because mostly everything that you can make in Unity is a game object. And then we're just going to call this one item prefab, just so we know what we're working with. And so in our instantiate method, we're going to do item prefab right there, and then we have to have a position, which we called our spawn position, and then quaternion, we can just do quaternion.identity, which is no rotation or default rotation 0, 0, 0. Perfect. So now we actually want to spawn an item at the beginning of every game. So we can just start with no items, and then it'll just randomly pick one at the start of the game, so it's not the same place every time. Next up, we actually have to create the method that will pick up the item and increase our score. So we're going to do void, and then it's going to be on trigger enter. And make sure that on trigger and enter are all capitalized, and then inside of the parameters we're going to do collider other. And on trigger enter is a Unity specific method that we can use to basically check to see if we ever hit a trigger. And remember, we checked that checkbox on our cube that was use trigger, and this is how we're going to check that. So we can check to see if whatever we hit name contains item, so we're not hitting the floor and deleting the floor. If we ever hit an item, we can then destroy that game object, whatever we hit. We're going to increase our score, and then of course we should spawn another item. And that's that. So now we can actually, you can see we have no cubes right here, but over here on our ball rolling, we need to drag on that item prefab to be that item that we set. And so now if we hit play, you can see that it spawned an item, and every time we get a new cube, it spawns another cube. So one last thing before we go, we need to actually add the little score counter on the top left that I had, and we can do that very simply by just doing void on GUI. On GUI is another Unity specific, and notice how on is capitalized, as is GUI. And simply we can just do GUI.label is equal to a new, nope, not equal to, just inside of it, new rect, and then we're just going to do 20, 20, and then 100, and then another 100, because that seems, we'll switch that one to 200. That seems fine. And then as our text, we're just going to do score, and then add a little space, and then plus score. Just simple string concatenation system like that. And now if we go back to our game, we should be able to see on the top left, yep, there's our score 0, and then it's going up as we are collecting our cubes. So, hopefully you all found this tutorial very insightful, I guess. And if you want to add some more things, go for it. Maybe you could add some more cubes that decrease your score. You could make a maze to go through. You could add some walls because we don't have any walls. The player could easily fall off. You could add like double point cubes. You could add some other stuff like that. You could have a high scoreboard. You could end the game once you reach a certain score, but really the sky's the limit with this one. This is a very just basic building block to go off of. So I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any ideas for any future tutorials, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.